Ottessa Moshfegh's new novel, Lapvona, brings us to a village in a medieval fiefdom buffeted by natural disasters, where a motherless shepherd boy finds himself the unlikely pivot of a power struggle that puts all manner of faith to a savage test. Ottessa Moshfegh's first novel, Eileen, was shortlisted for the National Book Critics Circle Award and the Man Booker Prize and won the PEN Hemingway Award for debut fiction. My Year of Rest and Relaxation and Death in Her Hands, her second and third novels, were New York Times bestsellers. The latest novel is Lapvona, and it's a great pleasure to welcome Ottessa Moshfegh to this week's book show. Thank you very much for being with us. An absolute delight to have you on the program.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Joe.
What brought you to want to write about this particular time? How do you define the time that this tale is told?
I define the time that the tale is told as being maybe from around the late Middle Ages, from a time long, long ago in a place far, far away. And, it was interesting to me that my associations with things like medieval literature or movies or fairy tales that all happen around this kind of time or era in human history had with it a sense of the fantastic. And I was interested in capturing both the grit and hardship of a very difficult time, as well as the magic of fairy tale.
So with that, the grit is really gritty. And the magical part comes in, but it's not maybe quite as magical as you would think or some would even want it to be, right?
Well, I think it's probably more in line with grim fairy tales than it is Disney.
Yeah, I don't think this is really Disney. But it
No,
is.
but there
But
but there is an old lady who can talk to the birds.
And was that a comfortable place for you to be as a writer?
It was also a really unexpected place. I didn't expect to be writing Lapvona when I did. It was an unexpected time for us all. The beginning of a pandemic and lockdown, and all of my projects were put on hold. I found myself in my house, like everyone else who, couldn't go anywhere or, wasn't blessed enough to be able to work from home, really needing a project and a way to both describe and process through what was happening, as well as a place to escape to and a story to travel through because I couldn't go anywhere.
There is certainly the escapism, but there is that tie to what we were going through and are going through of the pandemic and, of course, inequality and corruption around. And those are very much present in this novel.
Yeah, they are. It was impossible to write a book about anything else for me. It was a time where everything that I thought that I could kind of put to the side and ignore and focus on other, creative goals, that became impossible. And so I decided I really wanted to write a book about society, a quote unquote community made up of individuals, and how each person's life, their decisions, their instincts have an impact on everyone else. What was happening in the world politically, socioeconomically, in the environment, the pandemic, as we said, all of those factors suddenly felt like extremely hard to ignore as a fiction writer. And I felt like now is the time to build a world and really look at it from a third person point of view, rather than, the interior of a single character. I wanted to look at a community.
The name of the novel is Lapvona. Tell us a little bit about that place.
Lapvona is a very special place. It's known for having really good dirt. It produces fantastic crops, and it's in a semi-isolated area in what we think might be Eastern Europe. There are fields and farms, there are streams and a lake, there are mountains, there are some roads that lead in and out of the village. On the top of the mountain sits William's manor. William is the lord of Lapvona and has inherited that seat from down in the village. There's a church headed up by Father Barnabas, who is a very ignorant and corrupt priest. And there's a community of neighbors who worked very hard to sell their crops and animals. And basically, they're exporters, and they make money enough to support Lord William's lifestyle and basically keep themselves alive.
When you look at the place, it is what we would think of as a medieval place. There are pestilence and deformities and crime and extreme punishment, and it is that as well, with good dirt.
Yes. Good dirt and a fair amount of absolutely beautiful landscape.
Yes.
And one thing I was interested in capturing in this book is the ecstasy and divinity of nature and its absolute beauty, and the true ugliness of human behavior when it's bent on greed and fear and lies.
And Lapvona was at one time a really good place with the soil that you mentioned, had low taxes, and then a plague hits and things change drastically.
Yes.
Which we relate to, of course.
Yeah. I mean, I think maybe, because I'm a novelist and I write fiction, there is an element of lore. I mean, it's not true that any place is perfect and just wonderful and then something bad happens and it becomes terrible. It's just not likely. But in Lapvona, that is the lore of the place, that a plague hit, it filled people with fear of one another, and in their fear became selfish and closed-minded and vulnerable to corruption.
We are introduced to Marek, and you write he is trapped in his childhood with, quote, his sense of his own future as stunted as the growth of his body. Tell us a little bit about Marek.
So Marek is, if you could say there is a protagonist
Yes.
in this book, the protagonist. He is an adolescent boy with a strange character. He was born with what we guess is a spinal deformity, and looks different from everyone else. He's the son of the village lamb herder, Jude, and his mother, he is told, died in childbirth. He and his dad have a pretty strained relationship, which is also a very enmeshed and codependent relationship, as they live very isolated on the outskirts of the village, and they're both very antisocial. Jude has taught Marek that one way to access God is through self-punishment. And so pain is a real element in Marek's paradigm for what is existence. It is both something that he inflicts upon himself and that his father inflicts upon him. The pain that he experiences being born into a body that is not perfectly able is another aspect of how he defines himself and sees himself as different. And you might expect that a boy like that would suffer from grave insecurities, very profound, deep sense of need, and he does have those. He has a great need for maternal love and looks for maternal love everywhere he can find it, even in dangerous places.
Mm-hmm.
And he compensates for his low self-esteem, I think, with an outrageously obnoxious sense of moral superiority. And that gets him into some trouble one day early on in the book, wherein he commits an act of accidentally on purpose violence. And that pushes the entire story of Lapvona into motion.
And this brings up a transfer, a switch, if you will, of who Marek stays with. But you talked about that confidence. It almost comes as at least my reading of it was that, okay, I'm better than my dad.
I think that he feels in some way that he's better than everyone.
Yeah.
And is entitled to that because of how much pain he experiences.
What is it like for you to write about cruelty, to write about the grotesque, and to also make it entertaining?
Well, what I could say is writing about cruelty, the grotesque, takes as much effort and creativity as writing about, romantic love and beauty. I find there to be something inherently exciting about writing that elicits a visceral response in me as a reader. And so when I can write something that moves me, whether it's, being moved emotionally, spiritually, psychologically disturbed, or psychologically satisfied, or, anything, or disgusted, afraid, I'm having an experience alongside my reading experience in which my body is responding to what's happening in my imagination. And that to me is the most exciting part of experiencing narrative. So I don't shy away from what I think is, maybe unpalatable, because the world is full of unpalatable imagery and unpalatable people. I don't know. I feel like it's an interesting element for me. People ask me questions about this, and I say, well, I'm the kind of person who, like many of us, slows down on the highway when there's a wreck because I'm curious.
Yes.
And I care. It's not that I want to take pictures of the suffering victims of the accident and post them on the internet. I'm not profiting.
Yeah.
But if someone is suffering, I care. I also care that we're all mortal, and we're all facing the same inevitable end.
This book was recommended to me in an independent bookstore, and there was a bookseller there who said, you have to read this is amazing, and handed it to me. And an older bookseller who was there turned and said, make sure you read just the first page so you know what you're getting into. So I did, and I was like, oh, I want to be in this place. I want to check this out. We were having a small discussion about it. People said, well, the world is so horrible right now. I don't know why you would want to read about anything more repugnant than what we're going through. But I found this entertaining and almost calming in a way. And I don't know if that was intentional on your part or not.
Well, I definitely intended it for it to be entertaining. And I can totally understand what you mean about it being calming. It's one thing to feel at the mercy of a world that is cruel and out of control. It's another to look at a contained book in a story that is fiction, and you can put down whenever you want.
Right.
You can opt out of the horror of the drought you can opt out of the drama and uncertainty. And you also have a sense, I hope, reading the book, that there's levity, humor, hope, that time goes on and amazing things happen, and that there is some order to this all.
In reading various reviews of the book, people refer to it as shocking. I don't know how shocking I found it, but I'm interested in what you make of that idea of it being shocking.
Well, the idea of it being shocking to some people is understandable. I mean, there are some moments that are shocking because something shocking happens in the
Right.
book. With whether the whole book is shocking, I mean, I don't know. I would take that as a compliment.
Well, and I like that. I think that's great to take it as a compliment, because I think it's because it isn't, it's shocking. There is, I mean, there is, again, there is pain, and there is torture, and there is blood, and there is rape, and sex that is very vividly described and wrong, and yet there, it all sort of comes with that time and place and fits into Lapvona. It fits into what you have created. Were you ever concerned, or are you ever concerned about if there is such a thing as going too far?
I mean, I think we all know what we are comfortable with, and everyone is entitled to having their own boundaries. I trust that, people who are extra sensitive to certain issues, they can stop reading anytime. They can skip parts if they want to. I'm not interested in protecting people from the story I'm telling. I leave that up to them. But I'm also just I'm not. I mean, sometimes I've been described as a provocateur. I really don't like ever think of myself that way. I'm just trying to write the most interesting story that I can, that fascinates me enough that I could do it. Um, and um, I care deeply about what it means to be an artist and a member of the human race. And I'm trying to connect and communicate something I couldn't otherwise do if I wasn't writing fiction. So,
There is a review in the Atlantic: through a mix of witchery, deception, murder, abuse, grand delusion, ludicrous conversations, and cringe-worthy moments of bodily disgust, she creates a world that you definitely don't want to live in, but from which you can't look away, which gets back to your accident analogy. Do you think that that line is apt, appropriate?
I can understand why people wouldn't want to live in Lapvona. I wouldn't want to live in Lapvona. Um, Lapvona is not a great place for women. Doesn't really have any kind of support for writers. Most people are illiterate. Yeah, I mean, I would probably be kind of a shut-in if I lived in Lapvona.
There's very much a strain of religion in the book, and much religion, and it does it doesn't come off well, obviously. I'm interested in your thought of making that a part of it, and what ultimately you wanted to explore in bringing religion into the story.
I wanted to explore faith in all of its, in its infinite forms. And I think when, I mean, Lapvona is a really isolated place, and I thought that was an interesting setting to look at how faith functions, and as it as it is a part of religion, but also a part of just the human experience. And religion is something that is taught. It's a constructed system of belief that, comes with principles and stories. And in Lapvona, those stories are being mistold by a very uneducated priest in order to manipulate the populace to do whatever the Lord wants them to do. And I thought that was an interesting thing to look at, considering the way faith and storytelling works in our society today. I think more people probably spend more time watching Netflix than they do contemplating God. And that is a huge part of our development there. There's so much power in storytelling, and the stories that we choose to take in and build ourselves around characters, and we have opinions and all that stuff that we're responding to, is in a sense kind of a religion on its own, and has a lot to do with capitalism and the way that stories are built to hypnotize you. So I wanted to look at how faith can be used for evil, really. Not that I think evil is real. I just think that there's there's moving toward good and unity and productive change, and then there's selfishness and greed and working toward the interests of the elite, for example.
Right. Of how it plays with environmental abuses of power, social abuses of power.
Yeah. And the abuse of power to the whim of a single person.
Right. Do you always know how the story is going to end?
I don't know, from the very beginning, but usually, a third of the way through my planning process, I'll get a glimpse of an image and an ambition or a feeling, and I'll know, okay, my goal is to get there. And in this case, I hadn't really figured out how I was going to get there, but I knew at the end that there was going to be a decision. And it was going to be a complicated one to understand.
A complicated one to understand for readers and even for you in writing it?
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to give anything away.
Obviously, yes.
Yeah, but it's the kind of decision that I completely understand and think is worthy of consideration in a lot of ways. Like, it's the question of, is it better to live a life of suffering than to go straight to heaven? I mean, if we think that there's an afterlife, do we? I mean, it brings up all of these questions for me. What is mercy?
The way the story is told is by seasons, which also seems quite appropriate to bring us through a year plus of this cycle, if you will.
Yes, it starts in spring. It starts on Easter with an attack by bandits, and it ends a year later, spring again, and there's a different kind of loss. Yeah.
Does it leave you, when you're finished, does it leave you in a place where what comes next is fairly natural, a progression for you, or does it leave you in a place, do you say, okay, I'm going to hit a reset button and figure out what will come next?
In terms of my work?
Yes. Let's say the next novel.
Oh, well, I really think every book that I've written has felt as though it's in preparation for me to write the next one.
Hmm.
And there was a lot I learned in writing Lapvona. It was the first novel that I've written in the third person point of view. It was a story that has a large cast of characters whose individual journeys are woven between them. And so I, had to develop a different sense of structure of a story. And I thought a lot about suspense and also about writing from the heart in a way that I had never before. And for me, if I don't have another project on the wings, I can get really depressed when I finish a novel. I can feel really stranded and purposeless. So I'm lucky that I usually have more than I can handle in terms of what's off stage and, uh, waiting. And my next book is very, very, very different, um, which is exciting and which is what I tend to love about writing is that everything feels like it's a new world and you have to learn everything all over again.
This novel is Lapvona. It is published by Penguin Press. Ottessa, thank you so much for being with us. A great pleasure to have you on the program.
Thank you so much, Joe. It's great to talk to you.
Ottessa Moshfegh's new novel is Lapvona. It is published by Penguin Press. We enjoy hearing from our listeners about our shows. You can email us at book@wamc.org. You can listen again to this or find past book shows via podcast or at wamc.org. Sarah LeDuc produces our program. Bookmark us for next